Miguel Indurain is for many connoisseurs of the sport the best Spanish cyclist of all time. From 1991 to 1994, he became practically the invincible rider, being defeated by only two Frankensteinian monsters created by Dr. Ferrari, Yevgeny Berzin in the Giro d'Italia and Tony Rominger in the hour record. However, 3 months before Big Mig's explosion on the Tourmalet, taking on board all the concepts provided by the medical guru Francesco Conconi, a former Catalan teammate named Melchor Mauri, whose best result in a Grand Tour had been a promising 71st position in the 1990 Vuelta a España, destroyed the giant from Villalba in the same competition a year later. Do you want to know his story? Well, without further ado, let the show begin. Melchor Mauri moved to the pros in the 1988 season with the Reynolds team, which that same season would end up winning no less than the Tour de France with its leader Pedro Delgado. A good time trialist and road racer, he was a typical teammate without too much ambition to go far in cycling, as was seen in those campaigns. In 1990, he signed for Once, the newly created team led by the Cantabrian Manuel Saez Balbas, a man whose mafia nickname, Fat Balbas, made him one of the most iconic characters of doping in the 90s, and who certainly brought the necessary innovations for riders without a great future like Mauri to become real stars. Among them, hired as a team doctor, a Canary Islander who had given very impressive treatments to Spanish stars like Pedro Delgado in the 80s, the legendary doctor Efemiano Fuentes, whose masterpiece in the Once team was a monstrous transformation of Melchor Mauri. The Catalan rider had not won a single victory in his first 3 seasons, and was not even really close to doing so. But in 1991, the year in which EPO began to arrive on a massive scale in the world peloton, suddenly the burly cyclist from Vic began to fly on the roads, especially on the Spanish roads, where Dr. Fuentes had his base camp in the early 1990s. At a time when he was moonlighting, doping Spanish athletes preparing for the Barcelona 92 Olympic Games. Mauri's first display of dominance came in the Vuelta de la Comunidad Valenciana in February, 2 weeks after his first 2 wins as a professional in the Vuelta a Andalucía. In the Spanish Levante, Mauri showed that he was not only a great road racer, but that now he had also amazing climbing qualities, holding off titans like Buckler's Dutchman Stefan Roux, second in the 1988 Tour de France after having doped legendarily, as we've already told you about on the channel. Mauri arrived with the Tulip and Seyurs rider, German man Peter Ilse at the finish line, and took advantage of his terrain, the 20-kilometre flat time trial the next day in Pujol, to give a new victory to the Once team that was making the Spanish fans blind from the numerous joys that the riders were providing. From nothing to champion. Of course, it was a minor tour, but what nobody expected was that he would do the same in the Vuelta a España 2 months later. At that time, the great Spanish round was still held in April, and the main favourite to win was the Navarrese man Miguel Indurain, who only a week earlier had finished 4th in the Liège-Bastogne-Liège, lost to Moreno Argentin in a sprint, and who the previous year had surprised Greg LeMond himself in the Tour de France, in the stage finishing in Luzardiden. Other competitors were the veteran Colombian Fabio Parra of Amaya Seguros, PDM's Mexican Raúl Alcalá, and even Mauri's veteran but reborn teammate, the mythical Basque singer-songwriter Marino Lejarreta. Nobody placed Mauri as a possible candidate to win anything, ignoring his exhibition in Valencia, but he and Dr. Fuentes knew that the Catalan guinea pig was about to surprise the world, with an exhibition for history in which he almost wore the yellow jersey every day of the competition. And it was already from the first day that Mauri showed his huge third leg against his rivals, by winning in one of the strangest experiments of Unipublic, the organiser of the race. A time trial for trios in Mérida, where in just 8 kilometres, Mauri and his teammates Anselmo Fuerte and the Alopecia Herminio Diaz Zabala, curiously the other 2 riders who were the leaders in that great tour, beat the trios of Raúl Alcalá and Miguel Indurain by 8 and 12 seconds respectively. Big differences considering how short that time trial was. 2 days later, a new time trial appeared on that strange route, this time for teams. A discipline in which Manolo Saiz's men always put in a lot of work and effort to become true titans. In 40 kilometers around Badajoz, the Yonsei team crushed their rivals, taking more than 1 minute from the doped PDM team and almost 2 minutes from Indurain's Banesto, who was already starting to worry about his yellow rivals. But not Mauri. No, the prestigious climbers Fuerte and Lejarreta. They didn't even take him into account in his first great exhibition. The cycling peloton travelled to the Balearic Islands, Mallorca, and on a public flight, Dr. Efimiana Fuentes came along with several journalists from the newspaper El País, who were going to cover the next individual time trial in the Vuelta a España. Ufe was carrying a dark-coloured briefcase that caught the attention of the journalists, who asked what could be in such a briefcase. We will never know if there were vials of EPO or sachets of blood that the man who was given more triumphs to Spanish sport was already using at the time. But in a very nice and surprisingly sincere way, he answered, "In this suitcase, I have the key to win the Vuelta a España." And he succeeded. The Yonsei doctor gave his wise advice to the cyclist with the name of the Magician King, and Mauri more than made up for it on the road. In 47 kilometers of time trial, the Vuelta leader crushed all his rivals after an hour of effort on the bike. 13 seconds to Raúl Alcalá, who at that time was winning time trials in the Tour de France. 56 seconds to Miguel Indurain. And from there downwards, it only got worse. Parra was savaged by 2 minutes and 15 seconds, and was almost 3 minutes to his teammate Lejarreta. And despite that show, nobody took Mauri seriously, believing that Alcalá or Indurain were the men to beat. What a laugh Fuentes must have had that day in his Mallorcan hotel. Then came the tough mountain stages in Andorra, the first of which was more than 200 kilometers long, and with a clear aggravating factor: a tremendous cold wave that assaulted the riders on that April morning, with even snow that caused the riders to rush to their team cars to get some warmth or to take a hot drink. The cold gripped the favourites, who did not dare to attack the leader Mauri on that day, hoping that the next day, with the passage of the Boniagua at more than 2,000 metres of altitude, the Catalan guinea pig would finally stop rolling and rolling on his tireless hamster wheel. It didn't. Snow and bad weather continued to appear, and the organisers decided to suspend the stage, while Miguel Indurain complained about not having a great opportunity to attack his on-site rivals. He would have it on the next day, in a much less dangerous mountain finish at the ski resort of Serler. But Mauri felt so radioactive that it was even he who launched the first attack right at the base of the climb, before the astonished eyes of his rivals. Where did this Tolini come from, who had never climbed a mountain with the best in such a competition before? Not even his own director, who 22 years later declared that he did not know about the practices that Efimiana Fuentes carried out on his riders, did not believe it. That's why he sent his friend and confidant Marino Lejarreta to attack his own teammate and leader Mauri. It was a big mistake, since Indurain, the class rider Federico Echave and Fabio Parra took advantage of the situation to gain a minute's advantage over the angry Mauri and the Mexican Alcalá, who failed again in the mountains. Manolo Saiz kept declaring that Lejarreta, and only Lejarreta, was the leader of Once. He would take another blow to the jaw 2 days later. Again in relentless cold, the 25-kilometre time trial climbed to the Valdezcaray pass. Mauri again brought his huge anaconda to the ground to prove who was number one in that procession. Although the Colombian Fabio Parra did his best performance on that route, taking more than 1 minute from the young Catalan, the latter only lost 13 seconds to his supposed leader, Lejarreta, who was more than a minute and a half ahead of him in the general classification, and also had a bigger gap to Indurain, who again took almost 1 minute from him. The exhibition was such that Mauri left Raúl Alcalá out of the game, and whom he ended up overtaking at a speed worthy of Fermin Cacho in the Olympic 1500 metre final in Montjuic. Even so, in the Asturian stages, the selfish Lejarreta continued looking for the win, with numerous attacks on the Lagos de Covadonga and the Alto de Naranco. He managed to drop all his rivals except for Indurain, but Mauri pulled another one of his great successes out of his pocket, managing to convince Stefan Rooks, whom he knew very well from his victories in Valencia, to work for him in a completely altruistic way. Mauri lost only 1 minute in the 2 stages with Lejarreta and arrived at the last time trial of 55 kilometres with 43 seconds advantage over the Basque rider, and 1 minute and 46 seconds over the by then for the Spanish fans eternal promise, Miguel Indurain. Another time trial, and again another briefcase of Efumiana Fuentes that provoked one of the greatest exhibitions against Prudencio's brother, in his favourite discipline, the time trial. Using a totally aerodynamic posture for the epocha, and with a great cadence to his pedalling, Mauri crushed the Banesto rider by more than 1 minute in that time trial in Valladolid, and 2 minutes and 25 seconds to his former teammate, El Junco de Beris. 2 days later, in Madrid, that, unknown to the general public, had conquered the Vuelta a España, thanks to the impressive time trial ability of the prepared cyclists by Ufe Fuentes. It was the first great miracle of the Spanish doctor, and Indurain's last defeat before he won his first Tour de France. Mauri never won a Grand Tour stage again, and is still living off that success more than 30 years later. He only had victories in Spain, in French races of little prestige from 1997 onwards and at the end of his career, when he was already racing for Portuguese teams full of dopers, and in the Portuguese country where legends like Eladio Jimenez and Raúl Alarcón triumphed. A guy who was chosen by the president of Football Club Barcelona, Jean Laporta, as director of the cycling team of the same name, a venture that was a real failure, and ended up with 4 doping cases within the same team just 3 years after its creation. Mauri himself declared that he knew nothing about his cyclist doping, just as his former director, Efumiana Fuentes, had said 20 years earlier. Cycling, as you can see, is always changing.